Stop whatever you're doing, because this is not a rumor, not a whisper, and not another, they're working it out privately fairy tale. This is official. This is legal. This is final. The court has spoken, the papers are stamped, and one of reality TV's most powerful marriages has collapsed in real time. Kandi Burruss and Todd Tucker are no longer husband and wife, and the moment that confirmation hit the system, everything people thought they knew about this relationship started to unravel. For years, fans believed they were untouchable. The business power couple. The blended family success story. The ones who survived reality TV, fame, money, and outside noise. But behind the smiles, behind the red carpets, behind the "we're good" interviews, something was quietly breaking. And now, with the divorce finalized after Kandi's filing, insiders say the truth didn't just come out, it burst through the door. Timelines exploded within minutes. Old clips resurfaced with chilling new meaning. Social media turned into a courtroom of its own, with fans replaying arguments, dissecting body language, and asking one terrifying question: how long had this really been over? Because the finalization didn't feel like an ending, it felt like confirmation that the marriage had been surviving in silence. Sources claim the calm was strategic. The quiet was intentional. And once the paperwork became public, the gloves came off. Alleged private tensions, emotional breakdowns, and years of unresolved issues suddenly had nowhere left to hide. This wasn't just a divorce. It was a reckoning, and the fallout was only beginning. The confirmation didn't arrive with a dramatic press conference or a carefully worded joint statement. It landed quietly, clinically, through court records that didn't care about legacy, fandom, or feelings. Divorce finalized. Case closed. And in that moment, the image of Kandi Burruss and Todd Tucker as the unbreakable Bravo power couple officially shattered. What fans didn't realize was that the finalization wasn't the end of the story. It was the moment the locks came off everything that had been sealed behind the scenes. According to people close to the situation, the filing itself had been months in the making. Not emotional. Not impulsive. Strategic. Kandi didn't wake up one morning and decide she was done. Insiders say she had been documenting, observing, and emotionally checking out long before the paperwork ever hit the courthouse. What the public mistook for calm was actually distance. What looked like maturity was restraint. And when she finally filed, it wasn't a request for change. It was confirmation that change had already happened. Todd, on the other hand, was allegedly blindsided by the timing, not the outcome. Sources claim he knew the marriage was strained, but didn't believe it would reach a legal endpoint this fast. The moment he realized the filing was real, everything reportedly shifted. Conversations hardened. Attorneys got involved. And the tone went from private disappointment to calculated positioning. Suddenly, words like custody, finances, and fairness started carrying weight they never had in public. Almost immediately, alleged text messages began circulating among industry circles. Not screenshots for the blogs, whispers. Claims of long-standing resentment. Messages where Todd allegedly expressed feeling sidelined while Kandi's empire continued to grow. Claims that he felt more like an accessory than a partner. Meanwhile, people close to Kandi countered with their own version, saying she felt emotionally drained, constantly asked to prove loyalty while carrying the bulk of the responsibility at home and at work. The internet didn't wait for confirmation. Twitter went feral. Fans pulled up reunion episodes where tension had been laughed off. Confessionals that once seemed playful now sounded passive-aggressive. Every time Mama Joyce had questioned Todd's intentions resurfaced with renewed intensity. People who once accused her of meddling suddenly started asking whether she had seen something everyone else ignored. Then came the alleged confrontations. Insiders claim there was one argument, so explosive it ended with both sides realizing there was no coming back. Voices raised. Accusations thrown. Years of unsaid things finally said, without cameras to soften the edges. One source described it as less of a fight and more of a collapse, like something finally giving out after being held together by force. Social media chaos followed in waves. One vague celebrity post about choosing peace over patterns sent fans spiraling. Another about knowing when silence is safer than explanation was instantly linked to Kandi. Todd's online presence reportedly became more guarded, while Kandi all but disappeared. And in the absence of statements, speculation filled the void. Behind the scenes, insiders say lawyers were doing most of the talking. Not just about division of assets, but about narrative. Who says what? When? And how much damage control is even possible when the public already feels invested? Because this wasn't just a marriage ending. It was a brand cracking. What made it worse was the sense that this had been brewing for years. People began revisiting moments fans once brushed off. Todd joking about financial contributions. Kandi visibly frustrated during discussions about work-life balance. Scenes that now looked less like reality TV drama, and more like warning signs everyone ignored, because the couple kept surviving each season. And just when it seemed like the story had reached its peak, insiders hinted that the finalized divorce unlocked conversations that had been legally off-limits before. Things people had agreed not to discuss while married were now fair game. Old grievances. Unresolved disputes. Feelings that had been buried to protect appearances. According to those close to the situation, this first phase of fallout was only surface level. The real shock wasn't what the court confirmed. It was what people were about to start saying now that there was no marriage left to protect. Because once the paperwork is done, loyalty shifts. And not everyone was planning to stay quiet. The silence after the finalization didn't last long, it curdled. What people mistook for dignity quickly revealed itself as containment. According to insiders, once the marriage was no longer legally binding, conversations that had been frozen for years suddenly thawed, and what poured out wasn't relief, it was resentment. Long, detailed, and sharp. The kind that doesn't explode all at once, but leaks in controlled bursts, each one more damaging than the last. Within days, alleged private messages began circulating among producers, assistants, and friends of friends. Not screenshots for the public, but paraphrased recollections that all pointed to the same theme: power. Who had it? Who felt eclipsed by it? Who felt entitled to it? One source claimed Todd had vented for years about being perceived as Kandi's husband, instead of a force in his own right. Another claimed Kandi felt she had been shrinking herself emotionally to keep the peace, quietly compensating for insecurity she didn't create. Then came the whispered existence of recordings. Not scandalous, not salacious, strategic. Arguments captured unintentionally. Conversations saved just in case. Voices tired, not screaming. Tension thick, not theatrical. Insiders say these recordings weren't meant for exposure, but for protection. Evidence that certain dynamics weren't imagined. That certain patterns repeated. That certain lines had been crossed more than once. The mere suggestion that these recordings existed sent shockwaves through fan spaces and group chats alike. Social media turned from speculation to polarization. Camps formed. Hashtags split audiences into defenders and skeptics. Viral clips of old episodes surged back to the surface, dissected frame by frame. A confessional where Todd joked about finances now read like foreshadowing. A moment where Kandi sighed during a business discussion suddenly felt loaded. Fans began asking whether they'd been watching a slow unraveling for years without realizing it. Celebrity reactions added gasoline. Online, fans began resurfacing Mama Joyce's old warnings with renewed intensity. What once sounded like interference now sounded prophetic to some. Others pushed back, arguing those dynamics may have accelerated the breakdown. The debate became a proxy war for a bigger question: was this marriage undone by outside pressure, or by internal fractures that finally couldn't be ignored? As the days passed, more alleged insider commentary surfaced. Claims that Todd felt decisions were made without him. Claims that Kandi felt every compromise was one-sided. Claims that trust had eroded not through infidelity, but through misalignment, different definitions of partnership pulling in opposite directions. None of it confirmed. All of it plausible. And that's what made it dangerous. The internet thrives on plausibility. Then came the viral clip that reignited everything, a resurfaced reunion moment where Kandi said, half joking, "I don't have time to manage another adult." At the time, it got laughs. Now, it landed like a confession. Comment sections exploded. "She told us." "He never listened." This was always the issue. The narrative hardened, and once a narrative hardens online, it's almost impossible to soften. Insiders say the most painful part wasn't the public speculation, it was the private ripple effects. Friends choosing sides. Invitations quietly withdrawn. Group chats going silent. People who once benefited from the couple's unity suddenly recalibrating their loyalty. The social ecosystem around the marriage shifted, and with it, the sense of safety both sides once relied on. And just when it seemed the story had reached saturation, whispers surfaced about one final detail, a disagreement that allegedly became the last straw, one that had nothing to do with money or fame. A fundamental difference in how each viewed the future. Not careers. Not brands. Life. Pace. Priorities. The kind of disagreement that doesn't make headlines, but ends marriages all the same. According to those close enough to know, that realization hit hardest after the divorce was finalized. When there was no longer any incentive to compromise, and the truth stood alone, unsoftened by obligation. The marriage didn't collapse because of one explosive moment. It collapsed because too many quiet ones stacked up without resolution. And now, with the legal chapter closed, the emotional one was spilling open, with more voices feeling emboldened to speak, more memories being reinterpreted, and more pieces of the past being dragged into the present. Because the court may have finalized the split, but the story was far from settled. And what was being whispered next had the potential to change how everyone understood the ending. By the time the third wave of fallout arrived, it was clear the divorce hadn't just ended a marriage. It had rearranged loyalties, rewritten memories, and exposed fractures people were never meant to see. What started as whispered insider commentary began hardening into something more permanent. A collective re-evaluation of everything Kandi Burruss and Todd Tucker had ever presented as solid. According to sources close to the situation, the most jarring shift happened privately, not publicly. The finalization didn't bring relief. It brought clarity. People who had stayed neutral while the marriage existed suddenly felt free to talk. Not to the press directly, but to each other. Conversations that had been carefully avoided now flowed openly, and the common thread wasn't scandal, it was regret. Regret for moments brushed off. For discomfort ignored. For patterns excused because the image of the couple was easier to protect than the truth of the relationship. Insiders claim Todd struggled most with the loss of access, not just to Kandi's world, but to the identity that came with being part of it. He wasn't erased, but he was repositioned. And that repositioning hit harder than the legal ruling ever could. People noticed the difference immediately. Invitations slowed. Business conversations cooled. The energy shifted from us to you. And for someone who had spent years operating inside a shared orbit, the isolation reportedly landed heavy. Kandi, meanwhile, moved in the opposite direction. Quietly. Intentionally. Sources say she leaned into routine, the kids, the work, the schedule, not as avoidance, but as grounding. For the first time in years, there was no need to negotiate her decisions emotionally. No need to over-explain. No need to manage someone else's expectations alongside her own. That freedom didn't look celebratory. It looked focused. Social media, however, refused to let the story settle. Fans began stitching together long-form timelines, comparing early season footage to later episodes, pointing out moments that now felt like cracks, instead of quirks. A casual disagreement about priorities. A confessional where compromise sounded more like concession. A laugh that didn't quite reach the eyes. The internet didn't invent new drama, it reframed old footage, and that reframing spread fast. What intensified the situation were the alleged behind-the-scenes reactions from other Bravo figures. Nothing direct. Nothing quotable. Just enough side commentary to suggest this outcome wasn't as shocking to insiders as it was to fans. One source claimed multiple people weren't surprised by the finalization, only by how long it took. Another suggested the marriage had been running on momentum rather than alignment for years, surviving more on shared brand than shared vision. Then came the most unsettling development of all, the quiet acknowledgement that some truths would never be spoken publicly. Not because they were explosive, but because they were too personal to Monet's. Not everything ends in betrayal or scandal. Some things end in emotional exhaustion, so deep it doesn't translate well on camera. And according to insiders, that's where this marriage really ended, long before the court confirmed it. Still, the public wasn't ready to let go. Every post from either side became a headline. Every lyric Kandi sang live was interpreted as coded commentary. Every silence from Todd was treated as strategy. The story had taken on a life of its own, fueled by the belief that something more was waiting to surface. One last shoe. One final revelation. Something that would explain everything. But the people closest to the situation say the truth is more complicated, and more uncomfortable, than any leak could be. There wasn't one villain. There wasn't one turning point. There was just a slow realization that the version of the marriage shown to the world no longer matched the reality being lived behind closed doors. And that realization didn't explode. It settled. Which is why the ending feels unfinished. Because the loudest stories usually end in noise, and this one ended in silence. A silence heavy enough to suggest that both sides know something the audience doesn't. Something that doesn't need to be proven, debated, or defended, just lived with. The court finalized the divorce, but it didn't finalize understanding. That will take years. Maybe forever. And as fans continue to watch, analyze, and speculate, one thing remains certain: the image is gone, and it's never coming back. The only question now is whether the next chapter will be written through action, or through words someone eventually decides they're finally ready to say out loud. And if you're still here right now, understand this: you're watching a story that isn't finished, no matter how final those court papers look. Divorce finalization doesn't mean closure. It means permission. Permission for people to talk, to react, to reinterpret the past without protecting an image that no longer exists. And when that happens, the loudest updates never come first, they come later, when everyone thinks the dust has settled. This is exactly why you need to stay locked in. Because the next shift in this story won't arrive as a headline, it'll arrive as a reaction, a slip, a post that feels a little too pointed, a moment fans weren't supposed to connect. And when that happens, the people who've been paying attention won't be confused. Everyone else will be scrambling to catch up. So hit like if you felt the tone of this story change the moment it stopped being speculation and became record.